The Producer Podcast is back, and today we're getting social about social media as I sit down with Tiffany and Maria from Troops and Allies to talk about the world of marketing your film on social media. So, without further ado, let's dive in and get started. Thank you, Tiffany and Maria, for coming on to the Producer Podcast today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I'm excited.
Yeah. So I just recently found out about you guys through my interview with Daryl. So maybe since there's probably a lot of other listeners out there who haven't heard of you guys, just kind of introduce what Troops and Allies does and then a little bit about yourselves as well.
Sure. I'm Tiffany. I started Troops and Allies 10 years ago. I had been at another agency. I'd worked in film, and before that worked in the music business. And when I worked in marketing for films for another agency, my job was always to figure out how to go get information about the films to women. It was like, go just figure out, are there conferences or events that are primarily targeted to women. But it was always kind of an afterthought. It was whatever money was left with the budget after everything else had kind of been allocated. But what I found was that the majority of the audience for these types of films that I was working on, which were mostly faith-based films, were women, and there was no one that was specifically focused on marketing to them. So I started Troops and Allies to do that work, and it just grew. About 5 years ago, I started adding people to the team, and we have a team of five just brilliant women who, and we're not, everyone's always like, can you be a man and work at Troops and Allies? I'm like, sure. We just, the way it's worked out is we've had most all women, and uh, our mission is to tell women about things they will love, and that specifically films, television, streaming content, books, anything that is entertainment based. But really, we've really kind of honed in on films. And I also serve as head of marketing for Kingdom Story Company through Troops and Allies. And we met Maria through our partnership with Lionsgate because they distribute the Kingdom Story Company films. And I'll let her tell you a little bit about her because it's been awesome to have her on the team. She's just a huge gift to us in the world of digital marketing. And I'll let her tell you a little bit about her experience.
Yes, thank you, Tiffany. Hi, so I'm Maria, and I have worked in the film studio side for the last 12 years. And before that, I was on the agency side, but always focused on film. And have been just my most recent position at Lionsgate was VP of digital marketing. So overseeing everything that is on social media, website, text, email marketing, anything influencer strategy, but also talent social media strategy. So really anything that goes online is really something that I oversaw and touched at some point. And I've been at Lionsgate for 4.5 years and have been working very closely with Troops and Allies and with Tiffany the past few years. It was such a great partnership where we had a very broad campaign that every studio does, but also a very focused campaign that we're working with Troops and Allies on. And I've always admired from afar, right, how they did their work, how they structured their work, how they were really smart women on that side, also just heading up very niche and very strategic parts of the campaign. And so that's kind of how we worked with. That was our partnership for the past few years. And I then joined earlier this year with Troops and Allies and heading up now digital strategy and basically doing the same thing, just in a very more focused approach. Just as Tiffany mentioned, it's very much about what women like, how they're engaging with films online, and how we can bring value to them.
For sure.
Micah, I talk about this stat all the time. 90% of women tell other women about things they love, yet 91% of women feel misunderstood by advertisers. So you think about if you can close that gap, and you've got 90% of women telling other women about the things they love, and they feel understood by the people that are marketing to them, by the people that are advertising to them. Just like what an explosion of word of mouth and kind of peer-to-peer endorsements of whether it's films, books, that's how we communicate with each other. That's how we build our community. Women are really good at being both troops and allies for each other, and this goes from everyday living. Like, how many times, Maria, have you called a friend to be like, hey, I'm not going to make it to pick up my kid. Can you please bring him home for school? Can you please help me out? To things that are, bigger or more substantial or more work related. And you're like, I just want to bounce ideas off you. I need your feedback. What do you think about this? It's just how we operate as women. And so our hope here is that we can connect the films we work on, the messages, the themes, the content within those films with the audience through a true kind of heart connection of what, matters to them. And I think that's one reason we've ended up with a team of all women, is that, again, not on purpose, but it's just been the way we've kind of operated is, oh, I know about this. I understand what you're doing. I get it. It's kind of like a second language that women speak with one another.
And the actor is also, I mean, yes, women tell each other, and now there's so many different ways of telling women something, right? Like it's you're posting it somewhere, or you're telling someone on the phone, or you're telling someone in your mommy groups, there's Facebook groups, there's text message groups. There's so many different ways of us telling each other or supporting each other. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's we found so many avenues of getting the message across, and I think that's what we're really trying to leverage with Troops and Allies.
Yeah. I mean, I think about, I'm in so many different group chats, and you probably are too, Maria.
Yeah.
Like text groups, chats. And sometimes my husband is like, which one's pool pals? I'm like, oh, those are all my friends from the pool. The summer, the pool we belong to in the summer. Those are the women I'm friends with from the pool. And that's just what we do. We kind of organize and build community around the different things that we care about. And then we share that information with each other.
Good to know. I guess my first question, and honestly, we could probably do an entire episode just on this one, but is like when a producer comes to you to partner with you on their project, like what things should they be able to answer right away in that like first phone call or first Zoom call with you guys about their project?
I think the more they can come with realistic, like a lot of people come with a hope and a dream for a project. Like they'll say, oh, we want this to be like, we want the results of Jesus Revolution, or we want the results of Sound of Freedom, or that's our hope for this film. But yet they don't have a distributor yet. So they don't know if the film will be distributed theatrically, or who that will be through, who their partner will be on that, or they don't know what their P&A budget will be and how much money there will be to do the marketing, or how much time we will have. So I think that when a producer can come and say, okay, this is our distribution partner, or at least here we want it to be a theatrical release. We want it to be a wide release. We've got this much for our marketing budget. This is our timeline of when, and we like to speak into things like timeline, because there's certain things I think we can bring to the table from a marketing perspective to speak into a release date or a schedule like that. But it's hard when people come with very vague, they just like, oh, this film is so good, we need your help. We want to tell people, we want people to know about this film, or we think women are the target audience for this movie, but yet they don't have any of the other pieces of the puzzle yet. It's hard for us to be realistic about what we can do for them. Mm-hmm. And the more they have that information on the front end, the more realistic we can be about what the options are, and we can make a more solid recommendation.
Yeah, I will just say, usually a movie has already some of these things in place, which is great by the time it comes to me. So I don't really have to speak or ask all these questions that Tiffany is just asking. But I definitely, as I watch a movie, and if I have to give feedback, my first thing is to think about who's the audience, right? And have they thought about this ahead of time? And so obviously I want to know that, but then as I watch it, I just want to see, is that a realistic view of their film? Is that really what speaks to that audience? And I try to translate immediately into what would that look like as conversation, as messaging, as content on social media, and can that be distilled, right? Can the story be told very comprehensively, quickly in the medium that we're in, and reach that audience that we're trying to reach? Because that's something you have to have in mind as you go into a film. Otherwise, it's just becoming a movie that doesn't really serve anyone, and no one really understands why they need to see it. And having that kind of messaging, kind of lockdown is really important.
Yeah, and I think being willing to do research too, like being willing and having the resources to be able to do a research screening or two with your film so you can hone in on the audience is really valuable. I think the hardest thing is when someone comes and is like, no, this film's for everyone. You're like, well, no, there's very few films that are for everyone. And so it's just separating, when you're really close to something and it's been your passion project and you've worked on it for a really long time, it can be hard to hear, well, no, your film isn't actually for everyone. It really is for women 45 plus. That's who's going to come see your film, even though you want college kids or you want, this to be something different. So I think knowing who the audience is or being willing to listen to other experts help you define who the audience is a really valuable approach and kind of mindset to come to the conversation with.
You were talking there just kind of how, like, when you're first watching the film, you're partly watching to make sure it's actually lining up with the audience the producer's saying they want to hit. So like if you're watching one and the vibe you're getting is not like, oh, this is going to reach the audience they're saying, like, what type of conversations or things then do you have with the producer to either help maybe make the movie more that route or figure out, a new angle to take?
I have an example that comes to mind. I had a client who really wanted us to, they had a family film that skewed young kids. And they wanted us to target and work with and partner with a women's group that was very political, because they felt like these are moms that are going to want this type of content for their kids. But what the group those moms are part of is a political action group. It's not they're not, so I had to explain the disconnect of why I didn't feel like that was a good use of their money or their time, and also could put position their film as something that might actually turn off other people. If this is, it wasn't an easy conversation to have because he was convinced that this was the right group to go target. And I just said, I don't think that's right. And there have been a handful of times, not very many, but there have been one or two times where I've had to just say, I don't think we're the right agency for you, because I just don't think that's the right tactic. And I don't think we can be successful, but I can recommend some other people you can go talk to. I would really rather say that than do something that I feel like is not going to be successful. And then we look like we've been unsuccessful, but that's been so rare that we've had that situation. But it's not an easy conversation to have. And I think when you do have those conversations, you learn pretty quickly, what is this person going to be like to work with? What type of partner are they going to be? And is it going to be really truly collaborative? Or are they just looking for someone to execute their vision of what they think the film needs? And the latter, partnerships don't work as well, and they're hard, and everyone gets frustrated, and they aren't usually successful. The most successful ones are where it's a true collaboration. I mean, I think that's why Kingdom and Lionsgate films have been so successful together, because it's been a true collaboration. And Lionsgate has said, here's what we know how to do best. Here's what you guys know how to do best. Let's combine our efforts and figure out how to do that together.
Also to say, when you start off, and this is where the listening part comes in, right? And the data part comes in. You have a movie, if you're viewing it, screening it with the audience that you think it should reach, and then maybe things come back that are not what you expected it to be, having these open conversations and adjusting. I mean, at that point, you don't have a strategy yet necessarily, but then that should feed into your strategy. And I think a lot of that shaping everyone should learn from that, right? And you should be flexible enough to be open to pivot when you need to pivot. And I think it never is oh, here's the movie, and then this is the strategy, now take it or leave it. It's just kind of, you have to get to that strategy point, and everyone has to feed into that conversation. And I think at the end of it, I was on the studio side for 12 years, so it's a little bit different. I didn't work on a ton of indie movies, but I think at the end, there needs to be an understanding that we're all trying to do the best for the film, and some of the things need to be cut and some of the things need to be added that maybe no one expected in the beginning. But I think at the end, you're hoping you're going into with an understanding, with an agreed upon understanding into a campaign, so that you can really just laser focus onto all the things that you have kind of discovered throughout this whole strategy process.
Yeah, and I think being fluid, like marketing campaigns have to be fluid. They're not, you don't set one in stone at the beginning and then refuse to veer from it, because if you do that, you might be wasting some of your money and resources and time. Things are going to come up. You're going to learn things throughout the process. You're screening the film as part of your marketing strategy. You're going to learn things from those screenings. Sometimes you're like, oh, wow, this piece of the film that I thought was going to resonate with people, no one is commenting on, but everyone's comments are about how much they loved this character or this moment. And that wasn't even on our radar, and so you have to be willing to be flexible and adjust kind of your strategy along the way. I mean, you go into it with a plan. It doesn't mean you don't have a plan, but being flexible and willing to adjust is really important.
Definitely. When it comes to like creating your digital presence for your film, when should producers start looking at trying to get that up and running? Should they wait till after the movie is shot and in post? Should they be thinking even before, you're rolling on the film, that you should have something out there for people to find you?
It's an interesting question, because again, on the studio side, I already know that this is a movie that is greenlit. We're moving forward with it. Usually there isn't yet a presence for it. And so then we can start fresh, which is great from a studio side, because you don't necessarily want a lot of information yet. Not information. Information is okay that this film has been greenlit and was shot and will come to theaters, but you don't want content out there yet necessarily. All of that plays a huge part into how we're rolling out our digital strategy. In terms of first looks, we want to make sure we have partnerships locked down where this first look is of value, right? If there's a lot of content already out there about the film, and maybe photos and from set or videos, it can take away something that maybe in the strategy phase of this whole film, we've determined we want this to be more of a mystery, or we don't want to give away too much of this, or there's this one storyline that people are not really are drawn to, but then there's other things that we really want to highlight. So it's a little bit if you have content already out there that people are seeing, and social media, obviously, if something becomes viral, it just goes everywhere, everyone knows about it. So you kind of want to get ahead of it from a studio perspective, and then roll it out with the best partners that you've identified, with really a strategy of how you want to create your biggest buzzes around your trailer, your poster releases, and all of that. So you don't want to get ahead of that if you're an independent producer. I think for smaller indie films could be a little bit different. I think having a lot of content just banked is always great, right? Don't push it all out there right at the beginning because you're so excited about this new film, but bank so much content so you have it. And then, of course, if you want to independently release it, that's a whole different story. And then it's probably good to start building your presence early, just so you can build your awareness for the film within your own network, kind of have people spread the word. All of that takes time, especially if you don't have money. That drives a lot of traffic to it. So there, the time aspect is really works in your favor as an independent producer. But if you're hoping to get distribution, I would say have all that content ready, but hold it and have that conversation with the distributing partner that, hopefully you will get bring on board for your film.
Yeah, and I think it depends on your movie. Like, what is the big asset that you own with this film? Is it, and by that I mean, is there a big talent name in it? Or is it an IP that people already know, a beloved book, or a remake of a classic film that everyone loves and already knows? Or is it, you have a great story, but there's nobody that anyone knows in it. You're not a well-known talent. You don't have a big budget. It's not a known IP. Then I think you have to approach that very differently. And maybe in that case, you would go, okay, let's think about how do we slowly build the story of who we are, what the movie is, why we're making it, who the audience is, versus if you've got a huge talent in the film and they're only going to give you 4 hours or 1 day or 3 posts, which can happen if you've got somebody really significant in your movie and they're promoting lots of things because they're in everything, then you're going to have to be really strategic and say, okay, we're going to hold this content until tickets are on sale because that's when so-and-so is going to post. We only get 2 posts with them and we need them to post when tickets are on sale so it can drive people to something that is transactional and significant. So it really is, it's film by film and it's element by element how you approach it.
Yeah.
But I think to Maria's point, you want to bank as much as you can. Like, I think, when you're on set, you want to be thinking about, and we get hired for this all the time, where people come to us and say, we don't know what our marketing budget will be. We don't know who our distribution partner will be, but we know we want to capture marketing assets while we're shooting the film. So can we hire you to help us capture social media content, EPK, behind the scenes, gallery photo shoot? Do we want a unit publicist? Do we want to do regional local press during shooting? Do you want to do a set visit and bring in potential partners that will partner with you later during the marketing campaign? So we get hired to kind of do that for films when they're in production, even if they don't yet know who their partner will be, distribution partner will be, or what the total budget will be. You don't want to miss the opportunity to capture everything you might want to use later during your production.
Yeah, and just speak further into the talent part, and you brought up a good point. Yeah, it depends on who your talent is, but if you did have a big name in your cast, there's definitely, I've seen talent just seed out that they are so excited about it, especially big talent who took on a project as a passion project. It wasn't their big, it wasn't a huge studio or anything. They were just so attached to the themes of the film or the writer or the director, whoever is on that film. And if they start talking about it without releasing too much content, but that can also start building awareness for a film that is about to come, even though you don't have a release date yet. So I do think some organic conversations around key strategic people can help you. But yeah, key pieces, you just want to keep them to yourself first before you have, until you have a strategy kind of laid out to roll that out.
Let's dive in a little bit more to what you're talking about, Tiffany, where like you will also help capture content like during the production phase. And just like, how do you kind of figure out like what type of content you should be capturing for your film? Because every film is going to have different things that they need.
Yeah, it depends. I like to read the script. We read the script as a team, and we talk with the producers and the screenwriter, we just think together about who we think the audience is. That determines a lot about what you want to capture. Like if you think this is a youthful audience, are you going to want to do have a lot of TikTok content, or is this a little bit older audience and you want to gear your content towards Instagram and Facebook? And is this a kind of thought-provoking, serious kind of, is this like a social justice issue film? Are you going to want some kind of deep dive on why the movie was made and who it's impacting and kind of a behind the scenes that's more playful? Or do you want something that feels a little bit more like this is the heart of this story and why we made it and how important it is and why it needs to be told right now? So you can read the script and gather kind of those elements. And sometimes it's a combination of all of that. You want something playful, but you also want to explain, here's why this film is impactful. If you have a faith-based film that's super for the core, for the church, is there a way to build resources for pastors and churches to use out of this film? And do you want to capture that content, on set, or think about, we want to make sure we have a discussion guide or a sermon series, or, that may be something you want to talk through, figuring out how to capture. There's also the whole creative element. So sometimes the budget is big, there's a big studio partner, and you can get their creative department involved. And we did this on Christmas Pageant, which was amazing. We got to get Lionsgate's head of creative was able to pull a team together, and they sketched out poster ideas and all these things. And then they went to set and scheduled a whole gallery shoot day and, captured all the actors so they could set them up in different positions and situations later when they were building out posters and character posters and a teaser poster and a payoff poster. But that's a big scale. If you've got a big budget and you're going to be doing all that, you can do a version of that on any budget. You can say, okay, we need to make sure we spend an afternoon thinking about, we want to capture this cast together in this scenario for a poster later. You may not, be booking a full day of multiple options of posters, but you can be thinking through, what do we want to, because it's hard when you get to the marketing phase and you haven't done any of that. And now you don't have access to talent and you're trying to piece together a poster from just like unit photography. That can be really hard.
Definitely.
So I think it's a conversation with your digital team. It's a conversation with the producers, with the creative team. I think you're thinking, what kind of poster are we going to want? What kind of marketing elements? What kind of digital assets are we going to need later? We captured, Maria, tell them a little bit about, just recently we got some really fun footage on set of a film that will come out next year, but it was just super fun questions with cast. And it was just really unique, fun stuff.
On the digital side, I always love to be on set just because you get so many nuances that in the official, more polished marketing materials you don't get, right? But it's the camaraderie on set. It's, especially with young cast, seeing, as they grow closer as a unit, it's really fun to see how they're now, especially if they're A-list stars, right? You kind of want to see them in their element, that you want to see how they're working with their other co-stars, and getting all of that on set in between takes is just what people really want to see, and that's the things that go really viral. But then there's also, just seeing some fun in the project that Tiffany was just talking about. It was a period film, and so being there and maybe coming up with some ideas that are very, current based. So any TikTok trends and whatnot, and having them do that in their period clothing. It's just really fun, right? There's so many fun, creative ideas. And of course, you have to see if the cast is up for it and if they even know these kinds of trending things. Sometimes they come up with their own ideas, or they have their own presence on social media. And so you really start coming up with just a whole list of things that you could be doing. And you want to cover that over, we don't get always the full production time to create content for social media, but if you can get a few days in the beginning, a few days at the end, because the mood is very different at the beginning of a shoot and at the end of a shoot. And then they're sometimes more willing at the end because they're just so excited about this movie, and they have a more familiarity between each other. The content really translates. And yeah, we shot some really fun, just again, TikTok trends, dances, interviews, commentary on things that were happening on social media at that time. And it's usually it's really fun for the cast as well.
One question I had, and since you kind of brought up how like, are you doing more like TikTok like videos, or are you going more like your older Facebook audience? How do you decide what platforms to all be on? Because I know I can remember a time way back when it was like the norm was just you have a presence on every single platform. Of course, now there's like 10 times as many platforms out there that you can be on. So like, is that still kind of the thing, or are you guys seeing, no, you're more like focused just on certain platforms with your presence?
Over the past 10 years, there's just so many more platforms, and which has been really fun is that each platform has become, has their own voice, their own way of people talking to each other and sharing content and what they lean towards, if it's just text-based, video-based, photo-based. And so once we know what our target audience is, that's when we really determine these are the top platforms that we absolutely need to be on. And the biggest ones, of course, is Facebook, Instagram. TikTok is now one of our biggest ones too, which was kind of an emerging one a few years ago, but it's now even with broad audiences. I mean, people were saying this is really young audiences, and that's definitely true. They're driving a lot of the content, but I think there's a lot of moms on there now too who are getting their tutorials and watching videos, maybe a little bit more lean back. They might not be creating a ton of content, not as much maybe as the younger generation, but they're still on the platform. So we'll look at the audience, we'll determine what of those platforms are our primary, more the important, that kind of important layer of platforms that we need to be on, and then secondary, what would be great to have. And then it really is a little bit of a budget conversation, right? Because you don't want to create accounts and then not have enough content to feed them with. And we definitely don't want to serve up that same content on every platform. So be very, mindful and thoughtful about if you have a Twitter, do you have, or an X account, do you have enough content that you will be talking about? Is there a community manager that will be part of the conversation that are happening on X every given day? For Instagram, is there enough beautiful curated content pieces that you can put out? For TikTok, do you have Bing content where you have a little bit more of that behind the scenes look? And also just, that talent interaction that we just talked about. So you kind of want to see what do you have already? What can you create in the kind of span of the whole campaign? And what are your top platforms that you absolutely need to be on? And what are the ones that maybe not so important? So I think for our women movies, not that this is not a platform, but, we're leaning more towards Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, and maybe not as much into Twitch and Reddit, but, depending on the themes of the film, that might be something that comes up every once in a while.
This is an important element. Like the digital piece is so important to your campaign. And figuring that out instead of like the shotgun approach of just trying to get a bunch of content on everything, but really figuring out, which all goes back to Maria's answer to your very first question, as a producer, what's the best thing you can come to the conversation with is knowing your audience. So, it really is all about knowing who the audience is for the film.
You mentioned, Maria, there a little bit the budget aspect and obviously how that affects marketing and what you're all doing. So I guess like what can you guys share or advice can you give to producers about budgeting and getting those budgets? Like what type, how do you gauge, like, is this we need 20 million, to budget a project like this versus maybe you're going for a more smaller niche release and you only need like 5 million?
Well, it's hard to say. I think you have to go, what is your distribution plan and how does that, like, are you distributing on a streaming network? Are you There's some models where you are going theatrical, but you're just trying to hit a number for an output deal that will that puts your film on Netflix or Amazon or Hulu. And so you have to meet a minimum theatrical thumbprint
Mhm.
to be that triggers an output deal. So your movie will get placed on those platforms or one of those platforms. There's Fathom, and there's a couple other platforms like Fathom or distribution companies like Fathom. Why isn't it coming to my mind right now? The other big one, that's more event type distribution. So it's hard to say, I think if you have a budget of 500,000 or you have a budget of 5 million or 10 million, it's really, you could approach it by percentages. Like I would say you'd want to put at least this percentage of your budget against media. But it also kind of depends too on the film, because if it's a film for a younger audience, I would put more in your budget for media than I would possibly if it's a film for an older audience, or if it's an older audience, then we know they're on connected TV but we're not going to get them so much on, digital platforms as we are trying to go a more traditional TV route. There's a part of your budget I would allocate for grassroots marketing, which can be like doing a whole screening program or going out to, organizations, partners, ministries, depending again on the content of the film. So it's hard to say what your digital budget should be without understanding what your film is.
Right.
If it's a film that is really going to be a great tool for the church, like Jesus Revolution was a great tool for the church to bring people to because of the content, because of the subject matter. It was the bullseye target, but other people outside that really loved the film because it was historical and it was beautiful and it was so entertaining. And so, but if you have a film that is specifically for churches, then you're going to want to allocate a lot of money to grassroots so you can spend a lot of time talking to churches and pastors and all these ministries that serve churches and pastors to make sure they're aware of the film and how it could be used as a tool. If you have a romance or a comedy or something that feels a little more broad, then I don't know that you would spend as much money on grassroots, and you would probably put a lot more of your budget into digital.
If you have a range, if I get a range on digital and I'll look at the movie, I will say, and I've made that decision before, is it, for example, I had a movie earlier this year. It was a smaller movie and not a super well-known cast, but it was about women empowerment and it was a lot of modern themes, right? And I knew a lot of the influencers we worked with. We pre-screened it for a few of them and they just loved it. They loved getting behind it. It's just a lot of influencers who create their own content. There's a lot of people who speak about it very eloquently and want to create more content around it and want to support people who are making movies and content for media. And so we knew we could, without putting a lot of effort into it, just build our own little community that will be our ambassadors for this film. And so I did feel there was an opportunity to spend money with them and having the ROI there. On the opposite side of that, I also worked in a movie where this was a movie that was shot. We didn't have the opportunity to be on set or talk to the cast before. It was a very well-known cast and household names, but we knew that they are not going to support the film. So it was early on contractually, they will make the movie, they will do, go to the premiere, whatnot, but they're not on social media going to support the film. So in that respect, then I felt like I needed to divert some of that money maybe more towards paid media, digital paid media, where, having them front and center in a video or in the poster or in some sort of key image that we can then distribute on paid media. It's probably going to get us more because people are going to be interested because they know the actor and they think it's just a stamp of credibility and they think, this is going to be worthwhile to watch. And maybe you don't need to see them behind the scenes. I mean, it would be nice to get, but that's also going to drive people to go to the theaters and watch it. So when there's a range, I will take a look at it and see are there themes already that on social media people are talking about and rallying behind and are excited about. And it's positive and uplifting and all of those things. And then you want to spend a little bit more money in that grassroots influencer and just trying to create awareness through kind of niche engagement building versus the other side where maybe you don't have these like uplifting themes that are easy to talk about on social media, and then you drive a little bit more through to paid media.
Right. Now that makes sense. Since you mentioned influencers and that, like, I'm just curious, how big of a thing is that? Like, is that something that's nowadays super important to make sure you're kind of partnering with some of those influencers for a film? And if so, like, how do you go about even figuring out who might be a good influencer for your film?
I mean, for us, we look at the content, what's in the film and who do we know that this will appeal to? Like, for example, we're working on Best Christmas Pageant Ever. That comes out November 8th. It's a wonderful family film. So we're going to look for, I think a couple of influencer families people we're talking to are whole families that are influencers, not just one individual, but we're looking for a family that's known, as this influencer family, because this is a movie we want parents to bring their kids to. And it really is kind of a movie for all ages. It's a unique film in that it kind of hits all four quadrants of entertainment. And so I think you have to look at, and then sometimes you'll have a film like, this is an influencer, this is partner, but on Ordinary Angels, one of the key storylines was a man who was so deeply underwater in debt, there was no way he could climb out of it. Medical debt. He was in medical debt. His wife had died. His daughter had an illness, terminal illness, and he was $400,000 in debt and no way out. And so we developed a partnership with Undo Medical Debt, formerly known as RIP, but now known as Undo Medical Debt. And we formed a partnership with them. And at all of our screenings and our marketing, we encourage people to donate, because for every dollar donated, $100 worth of medical debt was erased. And we raised what was equivalent to $2.5 million worth of medical debt erased from the marketing campaign for that film, Ordinary Angels. So we did have our influencers talking about that program, but you might find an influencer. I mean, there's an influencer for almost any niche now. We've got influencers who are all about just acts of kindness, like Jimmy Darts, or who's the guy that mows the lawns for people.
SB Mowing, yes, I was thinking about him too.
He's amazing. SB Mowing, isn't that his name? Yeah. There's, influencers for knitting. We're talking to one of them for Best Christmas Pageant Ever. There's influencers for baking, for,
Book talkers.
Book talker. Like, there's just any niche you can think of. There is an influencer out there that does that. So you want to align with, what's happening in the film. What's the story about? What are they doing? What's a key moment in the movie? What is the, what's happening that drives the story, and try to find a connection that way. And that is also kind of determines your budget too. Like Maria might decide, hey, this movie is so heavily about the theme of taking care of the poor or the needy or underserved or underprivileged people. And I want to use this influencer who is more expensive, but he's got such a broad reach. And, you just start thinking about all of those things. This is such a perfect fit for him or her. We've got to find a way to work with them. Obviously, the people that follow them care about those issues too, or they love knitting, or they love baking, or they love red shoes, or whatever it is that this.
Yeah, I think what you're speaking into is also, just authenticity. And if you don't come into it with believing that this influencer really wanted to be involved in this or created this content because that's usually what they do, then audiences really quickly understand that and they're not going to pay attention to it. But I remember early on in influencer marketing, we were campaigns that, 10 years ago or so, but we started dipping into influencers that had just a massive reach, just to have them put a post up and say, hey, this movie's coming out, it'll reach 10 million people, and those were the most ineffective things ever. So only because you have 10 million followers does not mean everyone will pay attention, especially if the audience now does not believe you, that this is something you actually watch and do for yourself, then oftentimes now everyone is very outspoken on these things and there will be a backlash on it. So it's not going to serve the film or the influencer.
Yeah. But it's an effective way. It can be a very effective way to promote the film, but it really depends on finding that authentic connection. People that are really excited about the film.
Oh, that's good to know. So I got just a couple kind of final wrap-up questions for you guys. And I feel like this one you've kind of touched on a little bit here and there throughout, but like with the filmmakers that you've worked with, are there any common mistakes that you keep kind of running into that if you could caution upcoming filmmakers, like, hey, don't forget about this, or make sure you do this ahead of time because it'll make all of our lives easier, what would that be?
On the digital side, I think capture as much content as you can up front. Make sure all of your contracts are in place, right? If someone does not want to be in content and you will have problems getting that approved later, that's definitely something you want to sort out ahead of time. Any kind of really anything that you want to use in your materials, you just want to make sure you have an understanding of what it takes to get that cleared. If it's music, talent like this, any of that you need to be very concerned about as you're capturing it. But I would say now that we're in this age of everyone has a phone, phones are, very high definition, photos, videos, all of it. People can edit things really quickly on the go. Capture all of the content. When in doubt, capture it, bank it, and have it ready for whatever you might use it later for. And think about your social strategy a little bit, right? So again, as you go into it, just having a camera person next to you and capturing everything does not mean that you have what you need. You need to be mindful of these are the things that I want to do for social. These are the things I want to use for maybe the interview footage for featurettes, or this would be great for to use for whatever content piece you may want to put out later. But just being a little bit more mindful as to what you need to capture and having kind of to-do list ready to go as you go into production. I think that's very helpful for your marketing campaign later.
Yeah, I would say that too. Like just beginning the marketing conversation early and not waiting until the movie's finished and wrapped and then handing it to someone and thinking, the earlier you can involve marketing, I think it's always a great thing because they can consult with you on everything from, we've consulted on scripts and how are women represented in this film? That line, how's that going to be received? Like when we've been invited into the conversation, I feel like it's important that someone invites us into that position. But there have been times when I've been able to say, because I was invited into it, hey, this sounds really, it's going to be heard differently than I think you intend for it to be. And, so being invited into that so we can help kind of avoid landmines later, or making sure that we're looking at the script, or you've got somebody looking at it and coming up with some of the ideas you're talking about, Maria. It's like, hey, this is really fun element. Let's make sure we capture this and this while you're shooting it. There can also be great opportunities to bring people to your set, depending on, that's a good way to engage people. There could be opportunities to invite influencers to be in your movie, and that, in return, they're going to promote it on the back end if you don't have a lot of budget, but you have a movie that you could give a role to somebody that wants, a lot of these influencers want to be actors. So that's always something to consider too. Is there a way, like, we can't afford so-and-so, we know we're not gonna be able to afford them, but how could we get their buy-in early on? Or I just think having those conversations on the early side is really valuable.
I think you hit on an important point also, bringing people in and, having early ambassadors just in your fandom or whatever that fanship might look like. If it's something that was a book before, bringing in people who loved the book before, or if it was an IP that existed, but building this early ambassadorship of people where they feel like they have a little bit of ownership. They either saw it behind the scenes and they can tell their own stories about it. I think that also goes a long way of just goodwill starting off with a campaign.
And thinking about capturing photography you can use for art, for creative later, I think is important, because we've all had trouble before. Like there's not a lot to choose from to make this poster, and that can be really hard. And you can't afford to get everyone back together, bring everyone to this, for a photo shoot. Or they're not available or whatever. So that's where marketing can come in, to be thinking of those things ahead of time, especially for independent films. Like if you're with a big studio, they're thinking of that stuff. They've got an art department that's thinking about it, or creative department. But if you're independent, then I think it does behoove you to find a marketing partner early and talk to them about all the things that they might need, and try to carve out a little money and time on set to capture that stuff.
Definitely. Yeah. And I can relate some of even back when I was in high school, some of the things I did, I would try to make a poster, and it's like I had nothing good to
Thing to work
actually
with. Yeah.
do with it.
Yeah. That can be painful for sure.
Yeah. So then I guess just my final question is, if people are interested in getting in touch with you guys for their next project, where can they go to connect with Troops and Allies?
Yeah, that's great. Well, they can come to troopsandallies.com, and it's just TROOPSANDALLIES.com, Troops and Allies. And all, I get a lot of questions about that name. Part of that name came from too. It's kind of who we are and what we do. We can do campaign management, where we can put together a strategy for you, but we can also execute it. That's the troops part. Like, we can be the hands and feet of your campaign. And we also go find the allies, and that might be ministry partners, influencers, people that we know will be, like Undue Medical Debt, how we knew that was a partnership that made a lot of sense for that film. Those are the allies that we look for, that we think are going to resonate with your project and help spread the word. So you can visit us at the website. There's an email there. I think it's info@troopsandallies.com. I'm not sure, but it's on the website. And send us an email. We'd love to talk to you and hear more about your project.
All right. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this episode of the show. So thank you both once again for taking the time to come on today.
Thank you, Micah.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you.
With that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Producer Podcast. Want to learn more from our amazing guest and show host, Micah Versman? Then pick up your copy of The Producer's Life, a practical guide to film producing today. Make sure to join us next week for our can't miss season 9 finale of the show. Until then, make sure to subscribe to the Producer Podcast, and thanks for listening.